The check was for $4 a bushel more than the elevator was paying. And Noah Petersen read the number twice before he signed anything. He was standing in the gravel lot of a biodiesel plant 40 minutes from home, breath fogging in the January air, watching a stranger in a hard hat total up the weight ticket on a truck full of soybeans that 3 weeks earlier nobody in Marsh County thought was worth hauling anywhere at all. The plant hummed behind him, steam rising off a stack against a flat gray sky. Behind him, his father sat in the cab of the truck, engine idling, watching through the windshield, saying nothing. 6 weeks before that, those same soybeans had been sitting in a grain bin with nowhere to go. Everyone in the county had the same 2 words for the Petersens that fall: hold on. Gary Petersen farmed 1,100 acres of corn and soybeans on the western edge of Marsh County, land that had come down through his wife Diane's family 4 generations before he married into it. Noah was 16 that fall, old enough to run a combine solo. Old enough that Gary had started letting him sit in on conversations that used to happen behind a closed office door. That October, new tariffs hit, and China, the single largest buyer of American soybeans, simply stopped. No purchases, no contracts. The price at the elevator dropped within a week and kept dropping. This is the story of a farm caught in the middle of a fight it had no part in starting, and what a 16-year-old did instead of just waiting for it to end. Gary had seen bad years before: drought years, flood years, a corn blight in 2012 that took 1/3 of the county's yield. His answer to all of them had been the same: hold what you can, sell what you have to, wait for the market to right itself. He had 4 grain bins on the property, and by November they were full, sitting on beans he wasn't willing to sell at a price that barely covered what it cost to grow them. The problem was the note at the bank. The Petersens carried an operating loan renewed every January, and the payment due at the end of that cycle didn't care what China was doing. Gary's banker, a careful man named Russ Delaney, who'd handled the account for over a decade, told him what he told most of his row crop customers that fall: hang on if you can. These things tend to resolve themselves within a season or 2. Selling into a depressed market just locks in the loss. It was reasonable advice. Sit down, Gary told Noah one night at the kitchen table, pointing at the loan paperwork spread out under the kitchen light. This is what patience costs, and this is what panic costs, and right now, patience costs less. He tapped the page twice, like the numbers needed convincing too. Noah didn't argue right away. He looked at the figures his father had circled, the ones for holding through spring, and then at the smaller column Gary hadn't circled, the one showing what the note actually required in 6 weeks. "Those don't meet in the middle," Noah said finally. "Not the way you've got it written." Gary said the bank had carried them through worse. Noah said the bank hadn't carried anyone through a foreign government just walking away from the table. Gary didn't have a good answer for that. He folded the paperwork instead of arguing further, and neither of them said much else the rest of that evening. Diane, washing dishes at the sink, didn't say anything either, but she was the one who suggested at breakfast the next morning that Noah start making some calls.
if for no other reason than to know what else was out there. Noah started making calls in December, mostly because he couldn't stand watching his father run the same numbers every night without them changing. He called 3 regional elevators and got the same price at each one, a price that would leave the loan short by a figure Gary hadn't said out loud at supper, but Noah had seen written on a legal pad in the office. He called a cousin who worked in agricultural sales 2 counties over, mostly just to talk it through. The cousin mentioned, almost in passing, a biodiesel plant outside Cedar Falls that had started buying soybeans directly from smaller producers, paying on oil content instead of the commodity board price, because they didn't need an export contract to move product. They ran locally. They sold locally. China wasn't part of their business at all. Noah drove out there himself on a Saturday in December, without telling his father where he was going. The plant turned him away. Their first quality tier required a moisture content lower than what the Petersens usually ran at harvest, and Noah's sample, tested on the spot by a plant manager named Priya Anand, came in half a point too high. Second-tier pricing was barely better than the elevator. Noah drove home with nothing to show for the trip, and didn't tell his father where he'd been for another week. He went back to it anyway, this time calling Priya directly before driving out again, asking what it would actually take to hit first tier. She walked him through it over the phone, patient about it in a way that surprised him. Slower drying time in the bin. A different moisture check before loading, one his father's operation hadn't been doing because the elevator never required it. Checking it by hand with a probe rather than trusting the bin's automatic reading, which ran optimistic more often than not. It meant more time, more attention to a step the Petersens had always treated as close enough. Noah started doing it himself that week, out in the cold before school some mornings, running the probe through 3 different points in the bin and writing the numbers down in a notebook he kept in the truck. Twice the reading came back too high, and he waited another 2 days before pulling a load, turning down a delivery slot at the plant rather than risk another rejection. Gary noticed the notebook before Noah said anything about it, found it sitting on the truck seat one morning, and didn't ask, just set it back down where he found it. When he brought Gary out to the plant in January, Priya ran the sample the same way she had the first time, drawing beans from 3 different points in the load, running them through the same meter. Noah watched the number come up on the small screen and didn't say anything until she read it out loud herself. It cleared first tier by a comfortable margin. Gary asked her to check it again, not because he doubted her, he said, but because he wanted to hear it twice. She ran it again. Same number. The check that came out of it was the one that made Gary go quiet in the truck the whole drive home. The kind of quiet Noah had learned by then didn't mean nothing was happening, just that his father needed a minute before he had words for it. Russ Delaney was polite but sceptical when Noah mentioned it at a meeting about the loan renewal. Plants like that came and went, he said, and locking part of their income into a smaller buyer with limited monthly volume wasn't the kind of stability a note like theirs needed. He wasn't wrong that the plant alone couldn't cover the shortfall. Nobody was claiming it could. It was a second door, not a replacement for the first one, and by January, the Petersens were splitting deliveries between the elevator and the plant, depending on price and how much volume Cedar Falls could take that month. By the time the loan renewal deadline came at the end of January, the combination closed the gap Gary had been staring at since November. Russ processed the renewal without incident. When Gary mentioned where part of the payment had come from, Russ admitted he hadn't expected a plant that size to move that much volume for a farm their scale. Their neighbour, Dale Kowalski, who told Gary back in November that patience was the only strategy worth trusting, was still holding close to 60% of his soybean crop that February. He came by the Petersen place once that month, ostensibly about a shared fence line, and stood in the yard long enough to ask, almost sideways, how Gary had made his renewal work. Gary told him about the plant. Dale said he'd heard something about it, but figured an operation that size couldn't move real volume. Gary didn't correct him outright. He just said it had moved enough. Dale wasn't wrong that prices might eventually recover, and by spring they had, some. He just didn't have anywhere else to sell in the meantime that February, and his note came due the same month as everyone else's, market or no market. Noah didn't set out to prove Dale Kowalski or Russ Delaney wrong. He'd made a few phone calls because the math on the kitchen table wasn't holding, and one of those calls, after a rejected first load and a week of checking moisture by hand before school, finally went somewhere. It wasn't a clean story, not the kind where one idea fixes everything. The elevator still moved most of their crop that year. The plant covered the gap, not the whole picture. But the gap was the part that mattered, the part standing between the farm and a missed payment. And Noah had been the one who went looking for it instead of waiting to see if it closed on its own. Gary still keeps beans in the bins some years, waiting for a better price when he can afford to. He also checks moisture differently now than he used to. Noah made sure of that, and made sure of it again the next fall, and the fall after. Have you ever had to find a new way to sell something when the market you counted on disappeared? Tell us in the comments, and let us know where in the world you're watching this from. And if this story was worth your time, go ahead and subscribe. We've got a new one like it every single week.